So, I'd like to welcome our guest to the Great Indoors today. I think this is going to be a fantastic episode. It's Karin Jakubowski. Karin, how are you this morning?
I'm doing awesome. It's great to see you. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem at all. As I ask all of my guests, Karin, where are you enjoying the Great Indoors from today?
From Delaware here on the East Coast. It's a beautiful sunny day, getting cool for the fall weather, but nice and sunny. Wonderful start to our weekend.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, the sun is out where I am. I think it's a bit brisk there, but it's nice to have some sunshine. It puts us in that vibe. And what have you done recently? We've been locked down for a long time, and people are getting back to some sort of level of normality. But what have you done that you haven't done for a while that's given you some joy, something from the past?
So just 2 weekends ago, I was invited out on a friend's sailboat, a 40-foot sailboat. And the kind of beautiful story behind this is um, my music teacher at school. She had met this guy, and it was her second marriage. And he had this sailboat. And for a couple of years, we had talked about going out on this sailboat together because my husband and I just love the idea of being out on a sailboat, even though we don't have one of our own, but it'd be fun to have one day. Um, but unfortunately, my music teacher got breast cancer for the second time around.
Oh no! Oh
Um,
no!
and she retired early, about a year or two ago, two and a half years ago, and had the chemo and did all the work and unfortunately did pass away last November.
Oh no! I'm
But
sorry.
I brought it back to my school for the kids to find a way to remember her. And so we put a little focus together with the kids, and they created this banner for her, and we got a in loving memory on the front porch of the school, and we invited her husband in, and we kind of reconnected again. And he reached out and he was like, "Do you want to do that sailboat ride that we've talked about for years?" And we ended up doing it. It was just so invigorating and beautiful, and yeah, it was really special, like on multiple levels. And then just a reminder that every day is so precious. You never know. You say you're going to do something sometimes, and there's just a reminder, like just go and do it
Just
because
do it.
you don't know when you might do it. So
No.
I know it was more than what you asked for, but it was a really special moment for
No,
us.
it's nice. That sounds wonderful. That sounds wonderful. Now, Karen, we're going to talk about education today, and we're going to talk about mental health, and we're going to talk about mindfulness. And we have talked about education in the past on this podcast, and we took it from a student's perspective, right? And it was right in the early days of the lockdown and everything that they had to adapt to. But you're a principal of a school. Um, right, Karen. So, how prepared were you prepared? What was it? What happened on the ground when you initially went into lockdown? How quickly did you have to adapt?
So the Friday of the day we went home and didn't return, that entire week, everything had been building up to, something might happen. Maybe we won't, we'll be shut down, or maybe we'll go home. And you know what is so bizarre that in the state of Delaware, the governor and or the superintendents didn't come out with that message until literally we had gone home that Friday night and got a message we wouldn't be coming back. So it was crazy. Even that day, I remember looking at people going, "This is so weird." It's like all of a sudden we might get the call that, like, we're not going to be here, but there was no call made. And so it was just such an awkward day at the end of that week. And then to get that message and just know that, like, everything sort of stopped for us. And I think we were all just in shock, like, because we hadn't been here before. And what do we do? And what does this look like? And so it was a lot of like scrambling to figure out how do we stay connected with kids and not knowing what we were doing. And being at such a loss where usually in your craft, you know exactly what you're doing, you're prepared,
Hmm.
you know what's going on. And all of a sudden, everyone felt like a first year teacher again. And
Yes.
that is a really difficult feeling for experienced 20 plus year veteran teachers.
No, exactly. And I remember, from my perspective and with my children, then on the following Monday, them trying to figure out how do we do this remote learning thing. And obviously, from the children's perspective, we've talked about that. But I remember from the teacher's perspective, it was really hard. It was all of a sudden, you need to come off mute. Can you go on mute? Speak up, stop, I don't know, oh, where did you go, where did you go? And it was just like chaos because nobody was prepared from a to have to sort of go into this new world so quickly. But how did your students adapt to remote education and having to embrace the video conferencing world, the Zoom world, and all the challenges that go with it?
Yeah. So in that March, April, well, what was it? March, we were out for 2 weeks, and then the 2 weeks turned to the month, and then the 6 weeks. Um, so individual teachers just sort of figured out like, okay, some of my fifth graders were like, okay, let's set up a meeting, a Zoom meeting like every day with our kids. Awesome, great. Well, fifth graders navigate that quite better than your kindergarten and first graders staring at a screen, not knowing what button,
Mhm.
what, who, where, what are you looking at?
Yeah,
So we found our fourth and fifth grade teachers like getting into routine, like, yeah, we can meet every day for with our kids. We can even break into small groups. And I think they latched onto that much quicker and easier. And God bless my little K1, 2 friends, with the teachers, because it was just a lot with 20 kids' pictures on a screen, and the mute and the unmute, and the time of day, because then parents were trying to figure out how they're still working and having my child on a Zoom. And they struggled because they couldn't navigate that world at the same time either and had
yeah,
never had to. And so like a couple weeks in, we got to a point where some teachers had like one Zoom a week, other teachers had like daily Zooms, and then parents were like, wait, I want daily Zoom. And so we as a school had to come to an agreement like, let's create some schedule so parents with multiple kids and only maybe one device could actually have their kids
yeah,
go on and
yeah.
access their teacher at least once. So we kind of had to pull back, which made it feel like we were doing less, but because we had to just at least establish a schedule that every class has at least one opportunity that's not crossing a grade level. So that was unique for us that we would have never thought of before.
Yeah, and you raised a really good point there, Karen, that takes me back. Was when it all happened, it exposed. I wouldn't call it the digital divide, but you know, for my four children, there were two laptops that they could use, right? So they're fighting over these two things. The bandwidth of people's internet connection all of a sudden just evaporated, and so all these technical things were getting thrown up as well. Um, and you taught there how you coped as a school and how the teachers came together to work out, how to do a schedule and to get into a rhythm. And I found with the second lockdown that happened, because here in Ontario, the children went back to school in 2020, and then they were locked down again shortly after Christmas. But things were very different. There were Chromebooks for all the children. There were initiatives to make sure they had the right internet connections. The teachers had become IT super beings overnight, or their skills had certainly increased. So, so everything became, it was, much better the second time around. So, do you think the overall appreciation and ability to use these new types of technology, obviously it improved, did you see that improvement, and did you see the benefits that could bring as you went further into the lockdown situation?
Yes, and we complained a lot at the beginning. What is this? How do I navigate that? And then someone would come up with a pear deck, and it felt like one more thing to have to learn to navigate that could be a good system to use, virtually. But over time, as the teachers adapted and as our incredible grade level teams realized, let's build a grade level website so it's a one stop shop for
Oh,
a parent at
nice.
that grade. And we work smarter, not harder, put all our resources as a team on there because as a teacher, you do it individually. So there was actually more of my teams I found working together, smarter, not harder, coming up with a common how are we going to educate the grade level, not just me alone as my teacher in the grade. And then through the summer and into the beginning of the fall of 2020, we found teachers, experienced veteran teachers who were not tech savvy, say things like, I have gotten more technologically advanced from this COVID shutdown than I would have ever before in such a rapid pace of time because it
Yeah,
forced us to. So as much
yeah,
as we were complaining and griping and groaning that we weren't trained for this, we didn't go to school for this, now we're expected to XYZ, and that was a real struggle for us as we slowly learned, and it was a slow process, and we all were on a continuum of learning different programs, Pear Deck, things like that, Flipgrid and all that. Um, Over the summer and then finally into September, when every kid had their own Chromebook device, the district
Yeah.
said, here's the amount of time you're going to use in each subject remote, because we started the first 6 weeks of the school remote. We slowly were starting to, it was becoming more manageable. And it was funny because when we came back into school in November and then had a quarantine case um, for a grade level or a class, when I would check in with the teachers, this is what they would say. Unfortunately, I really know what to do now when we go remote, like if they had to go 10 days remote. And so what seemed such a mountain before, and you know what? I don't even know if pre-COVID we would have made this shift in education. Who knows when we would have made some of these advances? And because of the grade level work that they created in these websites and platforms of like Schoology, now the teachers were saying, you know what, when we come back to school in person, we're going to keep this because now we've created pockets of resources for kids to use and access when we're teaching a small group and I need them independent, working on a skill X, Y, and Z. So it totally advanced some things that it forced it, we needed it, and we wouldn't have known to create that solution had we not faced that problem.
That's such a brilliant point. It's such a brilliant point because you've come together under a crisis situation, innovated, and you've had this propulsion of digital adoption amongst your entire staff and students, right? Which is one of the, if there can be any, positive externalities or byproducts that's come out of this whole pandemic. And we've seen across so many different other industries this digital vault forward in time, right? And I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later on, but that does make everybody more tech savvy, more open to tech innovation, and that could be positive, in the future. So let's switch gears a little bit because I want to talk about mental health, Karin, and I found some really interesting stats. Now, the first thing I'd say is when I look at, and I'll read these stats out. So, I looked at these and I was just absolutely gobsmacked when I saw this. This was a research paper here in Ontario for the Hospital for Sick Children. And it showed that during that first wave that we were referencing there, when things were just completely crazy, um, a large majority of children and youth experienced harm to their mental health. So there was greater stress from social isolation, including both the cancellation of important events and the loss of in person social interactions. And that was strongly associated with mental health deterioration, something that we'd never seen before. And this research team surveyed more than 1,000 parents of children and youth aged between 2 and 16 years of age, and nearly 350 and another 350 between 10 and 18 years of age from April to June of 2020. And across the 6 domains of mental health: depression, anxiety, irritability, attention span, hyperactivity, and obsession compulsions, 71% of those children had a rapid or reported deterioration in at least one of those domains. So I spent a bit of time sort of just reading those out verbatim, but it's shocking, those numbers, the effect of the pandemic on the youth, on young people's mental health. But did you how did you see this, Corin? I mean, obviously you saw this, but how does this manifest itself? How do you spot this? Because you're working with these children every day. What was it that you saw?
So when we went remote from that May to June, the evidence that we saw was little because the only thing we saw where this would indicate was kids not turning their screens on, kids having their screens on, but never saying a word, being asked a question, asked to engage, and just completely mute. And when we would circle back to the parent and be like, hey, how's it going? We notice either their camera's off, either they're not there, or they're there, but they're not participating. Those parents would be like, my kid absolutely hates Zoom. Like, they don't want to do it. They don't want to be there. I can't get anything to flip a switch to be like, hey, it's you can talk, like you can listen. And so that was probably the limited view that we had of kids, because other than that Zoom connection, we kind of weren't in touch with them in a sense. And so then when we started the year remote, we had those grave concerns because of the kids who really struggled on it. And then as we went into the school year, 6 weeks remote, I had started a Mindfulness with Dr. J YouTube channel. And I actually, over the summer, before we came back those 6 weeks remote, I'd never done this as a principal. I created a weekly video for the kids and staff and the parents. Just, hey, how's it going? You know, I don't even remember what I would make up that day. It wasn't much, but I would always add a little mindfulness lesson or a moment of breath to just calm and take care of ourselves. And I got so much feedback, and the kids, they loved it. They looked forward
Hmm.
to it. Hey, when's your video coming out? And so when those 6 weeks started remote for the announcements, I'd create a video for the teachers to show. And families would say, we would sit down as an entire family and watch Dr. J and do your lesson with you. And so I found that something I'd never done through technology helped me connect with
Yeah.
those kids in a way that we had never before, to the point where when we came back in school, kids would say, I watched your video. I saw you on my dad's
Hmm.
phone. And there was actually more of an excitement and connection that I had with kids because of that than I felt like I'd ever experienced as a principal. It was a very unique, even now, kids are like, oh, when they hear I'm coming to the classroom, they're like, is she going to do mindfulness? Like now,
Yeah.
now I'm like kind of like known for that. And I think that helped kids. Um, and then even when we started school, some Zoom, it actually, parents were reporting it worked better for them than being in person. It
Ah.
was less anxious than being in a class and raising your hand and not knowing the answer. And even one third grader said to their mom, I really like Zoom. I feel like I can concentrate better and focus more. A third grader, like really 8, 9
Yeah.
years old, can self report that. So it was incredible that as much as you saw some kids really struggle with it, some kids actually did so much better and surprised their parents how well they were
Wow.
doing
Yeah.
organizing their work and showing up for online Zoom, because parents had a choice. So in November, when you had the choice to send your kid into school in person or remain remote, 200 of our kids chose remote, 400 were in person. And so we had teachers remote, teachers in person, and we navigated the whole year that way.
Hmm. But and I think, I mean, it is amazing, and we're gonna go deep into mindfulness in a moment. But I think this is something that Larissa and I were discussing, and I think when we look at this mental health pandemic that was compounded by COVID, but I think even pre-COVID, children have it harder today than, for example, when I was growing up at school in the 1980s, right? Um, and I had this discussion. What made me anxious? I actually enjoyed school and everything, but what worried me when I was in the 1980s? And weirdly enough, the only thing I remember that made me anxious at that age was the fear of nuclear war. You know, because there was the Cold War was going on. You always had to watch these weird educational videos about what to do if the school got hit by a nuclear bomb or something, and that terrified me for like a year. But when you think about even pre-COVID, children have to worry about climate change. I mean, I asked one of my daughters, my 10-year-old daughter, what's the one thing that worries her? She says climate change and the environment. They have to worry about the somebody wandering into the school with a firearm. They have to worry about the division in society. That, you know, and social media compounds all of these things as well. So even COVID aside, I guess the point I'm getting to, children have it harder these days. There's
Mhm.
more pressure and anxiety for children than there was, for example, for us when we were at elementary school.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is my 11th year as an administrator. I started as an assistant principal, now I'm the principal. And in those 11 years, literally every year, every 2 years, I would look at my school psychologist and say, the mental health of needs of these kids is rising and increasing every year.
Yeah.
Like this was pre COVID.
Yeah.
We were observing this, and I kept thinking to myself, like, when is the state going to give us more family crisis therapists or school counselors or mental health professionals who are experts in this area? You're asking teachers who have been trained to teach academically to be the healthcare provider, the mental health facilitator, the social emotional supporter, feel like a mom, therapist, guidance counselor. Oh, and get all your academics in too, please. And
Yeah.
then one of the things I see kids struggle with the most is the weather. So all of a sudden now in Delaware, we started having tornado warnings. We had to experience that. And then we had a shelter in place. And now we have a practice of shelter in place. So all of a sudden now, even weather related things, we're getting kids, upset, scared, worried, frustrated, thinking that, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to us if a tornado comes? And the lockdown drills now that we do
Yeah.
twice a year, and the fears that came with all of that. I mean, you're right. It was more than we had seen, and it kept rising. And then COVID hit, and now you have anybody looking for a therapist these days is has a really hard time finding them. Like they're all maxed out. It's like slim to nothing available if you now want your child to see an outside therapist, from what I've been seeing and experiencing and noticing.
No, it definitely is something that yeah, it seems to get worse every year, and even social media doesn't help at all. I mean, social media again accentuates all those issues that we just discussed, and even so much the recent report about Instagram and the algorithms that were affecting the mental health of young girls faced with the things that they see on Instagram. Do you think social media is a problem as well when it comes to young people's mental health, Karen?
Yes, and now I see it more with maybe our fifth graders. And even when I started my YouTube channel, it was very interesting because I had a fifth grader actually create my YouTube channel. He was
Mm.
very instrumental. He would do my videotaping for me. He's the one pretty much that launched it for me. This all came out of kids, which was I just absolutely love that. And then it was funny because when I would talk to a fourth grader, they wouldn't be ones that would say, and this is just in my school that I can speak to, could be different elsewhere. I didn't find my fourth graders as much on YouTube in the last 2 years, maybe even in a year that might have changed. But about 2 years ago when I started the first YouTube channel, but I found my fifth graders, they would say things like, I'm gonna go home and watch a YouTube video. I'm gonna go home and hide under the covers, and I like to sit there and watch, and it was very interesting. So I think, and some of the experiences we had with kids getting unfortunate kind of bully slash picked on through social media, that was more once in a while from our fifth grade population. And it's hard because it's easier to type something than say it to someone's face in
Yeah,
person.
of course,
It's
of course.
easier to post a video or like something from the privacy of your own home where no one is in your your exact sphere. I mean, we find that as adults, 9 times out of 10 when a parent emails me, I pick up the phone and call them. Why? Because when I respond in an email, it can sound so different than the heart and feeling and empathy that I'm really trying to invoke. And sometimes it creates more work for me, but in the long run, it's an investment. I even had a parent who had a concern emailing me, and when I picked up the phone, they literally were like, "Wow, I can't believe you called me." Because we kind of have moved away from that.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot to be said for what you say in person and how you say it. And I think social media creates that curtain that it's easy to just hide behind and say. And then once you bring it out in the open and that child really hears how that made them feel, what you did or said, wow, that other child is like, oh, like it's just so serious now because they're like, wow, I didn't realize you would feel or think that because I said this or that. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the disadvantage to the whole social media platform.
Mhm.
And I mean, I interviewed two high schoolers on my podcast, and they were like, it's the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning. We check our social media feed. And it just triggers all this emotion. Who said what? Was I involved? Who did or didn't say something positive or negative about me? And we know that's not healthy for us to live in that fight or flight zone. It eventually will cause a dis-ease, a disease in our bodies. And so I think there's so much more talk around this to help protect kids and plan for it carefully so you don't exhaust yourself mentally, socially, physically, emotionally, physically through
Mhm.
what could or couldn't be out there on the
Yeah.
social media feeds.
And I think we tend on this podcast to give social media a hard time, right? We tend to see the bad in it, but there is good in it as well. There are things that can be harnessed, and I think you've done this, Karen, with your YouTube channel, which we're going to talk about now, which promotes mindfulness and is a platform to get to children that need some help or just want to learn more about it. But I think the story on how you started all of this, how you became involved with this. We'll talk about now. And it was influenced by the book by Louise Hay, right? I Think I Am. Tell us that story if you could, Karen, and how that then led to the YouTube channel and the whole thing you've got going on. Because I think it's a great story.
So when I was assistant principal, one of my last years with my principal before she moved to another school, she had gone to some training and came back with this idea of positive affirmations using the finger point touches with your finger. Like you put your thumb to your first finger and then your second finger for each word you say in the affirmation. So she would teach the kids sometimes on the loud announcements, sometimes through a read aloud, like let's just do some positive affirmations together. So I am peaceful. And she would have them put their fingers together and they would say the affirmation with her. And so we got into kind of this habit of practicing these positive affirmations. And then the following year, she had moved to another school. And one of my paraprofessionals gave me a CD called 101 Positive Affirmations by Louise Hay. And I put it in my CD player driving home. And it was all these positive affirmations that you're telling yourself, like, now I'm making them up because I can't remember them all, but like, whatever I'm going through today, the good is going to happen. I'm going to experience the good. I'm going to feel the good. No matter what someone is saying or doing to me, I'm going to take the message of, you know what? I am wonderful. I am in a good place. Everything is well with me. It was things like that. And she just goes through these 101 things. I would listen to it all the way home. And all of a sudden, by the time I got home, I wasn't thinking about the parent that was upset with something I did or said, the kid that's really struggling, that I'm racking my brain. How can I help them? And I don't have an answer at the moment. Maybe my teacher who, is dealing with something that's really challenging and it's hard not as the principal to take the weight of that. And all of a sudden, it was lifting me above all the things that just can weigh on you. And let's just say in life in general, you don't have to be like some, owner of a
Hmm.
company to experience this. This is just everyday life for us. And so I realized like these affirmations were helping me. They were changing my mindset, lifting me above the situation, helping me have a positive outlook on the day where things would just like kind of run me down. Well, then this same paraprofessional was like, look at this picture book for kids Louise Hay wrote. And I'm like, what is it? And if any parent is listening or anyone who knows anyone with kids, I highly recommend this book. If I could, I'd go on to raise money to get a book for every kid in the world. It's called I Think I Am. And it takes ordinary situations like I always forget something. And there's a picture of the kid leaving his sweater somewhere. And instead say to yourself, you know what? I might make a mistake, but I'm going to move on. And it teaches kids like if someone doesn't want to play with you on the playground, stop and say to yourself, I am loved. And it flips the negative thoughts that our mind traditionally goes to that just kind of take us down. And it helps kids reframe the situation to actually like take care of themselves in a way mentally.
Hmm.
And so I started reading this picture book in classrooms as a read aloud and doing these affirmations. Well, then one day when I was in a fourth grade class, at the end, the kid goes, Dr. J, you should really read one of those on the announcements every day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love that you came up with that idea. And B, I'm so totally starting that tomorrow. And so from that day on, that entire year, we would do my normal announcements. And then I'd say, all right, here's our positive affirmation. I am grateful. Okay, let's say that together. I am grateful. And for a whole year, we started that. And then we heard of a mindfulness coach at a nearby elementary school. And my school counselor was like, we totally have to get this person into our school. So
Hmm.
we put a grant together, some of our building budget, and we piloted it just in our first grade for like 6 weeks and that year. And this was where I had teachers who initially were like, what is this? And why are we doing it? And yeah, I'm not too, into this. No worries. The coach comes in, you're just listening. You don't really have to do anything. At the end of those 6 weeks, the kids were going home telling their parents what they were learning, which you can't even get a kid to tell you what they learned at school that day.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the teachers, especially that one, was like, Karin, I'm using this for my kids now, and I'm actually using it for myself. And it's through a program called Mindful Schools, and they offer courses. And the following year, I offered the first level course to any of my teachers who wanted to take it. We had about 7 of them sign up. And then we hired this coach for to teach it to all the kids. So she came in for 8 weeks, once a week, 15 minutes. And she taught them lessons using their senses, all about noticing sound, noticing what you see, noticing your breath, teaching us some ball breath, finger breath activities. And I was just watching this. And at the end of these 8 weeks, she had done a pre and post survey with our second through fifth graders. 40% of the kids said it helped them sleep better at night. I was like, are you serious? Get out. If I can help one kid sleep better, I'll do anything.
Yeah.
80% said this should be taught to other kids. Kids thought this should be taught to other kids, not just, is this helping you? And all of a sudden, my eyes were just totally being open to this area of something that could be a proactive intervention that we could provide to kids. I had been for years waiting for the state to give us more supports, and they weren't coming. And I just kept getting frustrated. And all of a sudden, that was the game changer for me. I was like, wait a second, I can do this with these kids. So I ended up taking the second course for the educator course to learn the lessons, get the lessons. I started teaching it to the kids to keep the work going, to the point where even a fifth grader who had been taking a test, they had learned in one of the lessons, if you're taking a test and you don't know and you're frustrated and you kind of start getting upset because you don't know the answer, take your 3 deep breaths, go back to it. And he self-reported that he was able to like do a great job finishing his test where he had gotten frustrated. So I started creating little videos on this YouTube channel with this fifth grader that I started, Mindfulness with Dr. J, because we say we do mindfulness, but what in the world does that look or mean? And so
Hmm.
I wanted the parents to start to get a look into this. And that's right when COVID hit. We all went home. And one of the next videos I had posted on YouTube was me doing the announcements from my bedroom against a wall doing a lesson from mindfulness because that was what we knew to do. And it got like some 900 views. A secondary assistant principal was like, I'm telling my kids to watch your video. Why? Because it's something to give them a tool where we had no idea what the next moment held.
I I think it's such an amazing story, Karen, and I think mindfulness for me is something, and I've started meditating just in the last year, and it's something that's helped me. But I think the story, and I'm a huge advocate of it, and I think the way that you've propagated it through the school, the way that you've managed to onboard the parents and other teachers and other institutions is just incredible. And the results, it's not just something for a bit of fun. You're seeing tangible, meaningful results, right? So I think it just goes without saying. So you've started your YouTube channel now, Mindfulness with Dr. J. And what other techniques of mindfulness do you deploy on that YouTube channel?
So I haven't been using the YouTube channel as much anymore because then I got into creating my another YouTube channel called Educational Impact Academy.
Okay.
And now I've been focusing a lot of my work also creating a podcast just this past February called Momnificent because parents with kids who are struggling and have behavior challenging moments, I noticed they were coming up at a loss of like what to do and feeling so alone. And it doesn't have to be that way. So as much as this mindfulness was starting to take care of like some mental health needs of kids, and I'm gonna go as far as to say is it's taking care of mental health needs of our kids in our school that we didn't even know had an issue.
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
this mindfulness lessons we teach, that kid on the struggling test, to my knowledge, doesn't have an anxiety issue, but this helped him.
Hmm.
And yes, this program is supporting and helping all of our kids with anxiety or to monitor their stress and help them self regulate, which is a powerful tool. So then when COVID hit and we went home and had a little more time than we normally would because we were all home, I actually started working with a company to teach me how to build a podcast, how to create maybe like a free webinar for parents to teach them some of these strategies and some collaborative problem solving strategies I've done with kids in school over the years. And so some of my mindfulness with Dr. J has gotten a little quieter, because I've now focused since February more of my time on this podcast to bring in authors, doctors, lawyers, former heads of school, students talking about mindfulness, ADHD, autism, anything to help educate a mom on the run, on the go, working full time, but give me a little piece of knowledge and wisdom that maybe I could shift something today that improves the quality of my relationship and life with my kids. And that's the whole purpose of it. And it's just been exciting and inspiring, the guests that I've met and the feedback that I've gotten from parents.
No, it's amazing. And look, we've talked about what happened to children and to educators and parents when we went into lockdown. We looked at the separate pandemic of mental health that did exist pre-COVID, but was accelerated and amplified by the COVID situation. And I think your story, why I find it so amazing, Karin, is then you've innovated. You've found a solution that has demonstrable results, and then you've used technology to propagate it, promote it, and it's a solution to the problem. And I think it's a really important solution and something that all educators all over the world should look at mandating. I really do feel that strongly about it. And it reminds me now, this is the changing face of education, I think, as a whole. And when we spoke with Randy Zuckerberg a couple of weeks ago, one of the things we discussed, we were talking about diversity and inclusion. And we both reminisced to our school years, which was around 30, 35 years ago, where, you know, boys and girls did different things at school. The boys went into a woodwork class, the girls went into a needlework or a home economics or a cooking class. And we both remarked at how primitive that was, right? Yeah, that was only now there's a lot more equality, and people have, regardless of your gender, you can choose what you want to do. But here's another thing that I picked up on when we look at these, only in the period of 35 years. When I and this and I don't mean to humorize this at all, or to make it lighthearted, but this is a reality. When I was at school, if you got sent to the headmaster's office or the principal's office, headmaster in the UK, because you'd done something wrong, and I'm thankful to say I was a good kid. I never got sent to the headmaster's office once, if my mother and father are listening. Um, but it could be a very traumatic experience. I mean, very traumatic. Even in the 1980s, the headmaster, if you were sent there, dependent on what you could do, could physically hit you with a stick. Right? I mean, that is in my lifetime. In the United Kingdom, you would be hit with a stick for misbehaving. And when you think about it, and even in those days, mental health issues or learning disabilities amongst children would go unnoticed. And it was those children that were more often than not sent to the headmaster's office and were then physically assaulted, right? Which wouldn't do anybody any good. And when you think about it, how primitive is that? It's crazy. Now, you're a principal, Karin. People have to come to your office for various things, but you have an entirely different approach, right? That's not always possible. And I'd like you to take us through that, because again, I think it illustrates the dichotomy just in one generation of how education and how the educational system is advancing.
Yes. So on the flip side, I was not a good kid when I was younger.
I don't believe it. I don't
And
believe
nobody can believe it.
it.
I lied. I stole things. I cheated on tests. This was in elementary school. Like, I mean, thank God I got myself together by the time middle and high school. I know Larissa's like, you're kidding me. You're making that up, Karin. No, I'm not. This is crazy. And as a kid, I hated the feeling that would come inside me, the feelings that would come up when I was in trouble, and adults would say and do things that would make me feel worse. I already felt bad. And the way I interpreted it was that I was bad to my core. And as I grew up, I never wanted to treat kids that way. And so, when I became a teacher, I really was careful in what I said and how I treated them because I knew how that felt. And I never wanted a kid to feel that. And I really believed that when you did something wrong, even if you didn't look like you were remorseful or say something that I knew you were remorseful, as hard as that is sometimes for adults to kind of get that communication from a child, I believed they were already feeling bad. And I wasn't the one who was supposed to make them feel worse. And so I had some struggling kids in school, some with special needs, and they would react or respond in class. And I didn't know how to help them. I couldn't really like connect with them. I couldn't figure out why they were doing what they were doing. One would hide in the clothes in the little cubby. One would shut down and just wouldn't do their work. So I would have lunch with them to try to connect with them, like to figure out what makes them tick to help them get through this year and do what kind of we have to do. And I really had a hard time, and I never felt like I really, really got to the bottom of why that kid did what they did and what I could do to support them. As much as the behavior coach would come in and she would give me feedback, and I'd try it and didn't always feel successful, and then I would feel like it was my problem. Um, but then when I was a problem study, child study team facilitator, they always come up with all these words. Basically, in 2 elementary schools in Delaware, in public schools, I was hired to meet with teachers who had kids who were struggling, that didn't qualify for a 504, didn't qualify for an IEP, because usually you can create some like supports that kind of help them get through school
Hmm.
in some specific way. So there was these pocket of kids that like, maybe it was like executive functioning, behavior, just wouldn't bring their school bag to school. They wouldn't do their homework. And we were like, what do we do with these kids? And then I went to a training with Dr. Stuart Ablon out of Harvard. He came to Delaware, met with 6 school districts, and talked about this collaborative problem solving approach, a very positive approach with empathy, problem solving, identifying maybe there's a lagging skill the kid has that you have to teach them. And his whole tagline was, all kids do well if they can. And I was like, yes, I believe that. And everything he said just synced with what I really believed about kids, as difficult as it could be in a moment of a challenging behavior for them. And so I really studied his work. The district had us do like connect calls with him. We did a little bit of more training. And I read a book called Lost at Schools that talks about the process in depth. And I really just soaked it up entirely and started practicing the processes and procedures he was teaching to go through with a kid to get them to really tell you what's really going on. And a lot of times kids won't say what's really going on. You look at them and you're like, why did you do
Hmm.
that? They just shrug their shoulders or say, I don't know. And this process, as I started doing it, no, it wasn't perfect at first. And yes, it took time, like anything. There wasn't a magic switch. It didn't just automatically happen for me. But because I didn't give up on it, when I became an assistant principal and continued this process, I would have a kid who, like, here's a simple example. The custodian was like, a kid peed on the wall, and we found one kid went there. Well, how are you going to get that kid to admit that? But through this process, and I'm not saying it might work every time, but in that situation, it was a beautiful picture of using empathy, an empathetic tone of voice, not talking down to the kid, not raising my voice, not putting them in a position of I'm me and you are you and how could you do this? And a beautiful question that they teach you to use, which says like, what's up with that? And you just wait this impregnable pause and you wait some more. And when they shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know, you ask this beautiful question that they teach you that says, if you did know, what would you say? And the kid just stares at you like, who are you and where have you come from? Because no one's ever treated me like that.
Hmm.
And I would use this process. And in that situation, that kid actually admitted to peeing on the wall. Where when I called his mom, she was like, I don't believe it. My kid would never do that. And I was like, honey, I need you to come tell your mom what happened. And he told her, and she wouldn't even have believed me. And so, I mean, time and time again, some of our kids with just really difficult moments, I would
Hmm.
use this process, and because of it, I created a connection with them because I really believe in connection before you correct. And so, during those years as assistant principal, I would have lunch once a week with all the kids who were the high flyers of behavior referrals. And we would eat lunch together. We would play Uno just to give them one fun time in their day. Because God bless you, when you go back to class, for some reason everything you do is wrong. You need to improve. You shouldn't have. You had to. And I believe in that connection. And so I would play Uno with them, and then if they ended up in my office at some point, I'd be like, now you and I both know each other by now. And I would come from that premise. I mean, sometimes I say, I know you know I love you, but I know some people are like really funny about that. But they knew that I cared about them. And then when I had to really tell them, like, this is how it's going to be, or this is your consequence because this is part of life, I saw those kids slowly make changes for the good. And I believe at the core of this process, you, because of it, you could change the trajectory of a kid's life, because we all, unfortunately, can remember when a teacher said something that really, hurt us kind of like deep down to the core. And I don't believe it has to be that way. And I've seen it completely help these kids who, for the life of them, maybe they had a disability that no one had even identified yet, but we didn't have to treat them like they were the bad kid till we got through what problem needed to be solved or the skill that needed to be taught.
No, that's absolutely amazing, and it's a beautiful story, Karen. And yeah, I mean, again, looking at at how and some of the things that you're doing, and the methodologies that you're applying, how effective they are, how humane they are. Because again, talking about the education system in other countries in different points of time, it's completely different. So I think that as well, with the mindfulness, have you seen when going through the mindfulness practices with children, not only obviously does it help them cope with anxiety, help them cope with stress, you've seen improvement in their performance and their results, but do their behaviors improve as well?
Yeah. So here's an example of a first grader who, I don't know why, but would sometimes crawl under his desk, refuse to go to special. The class would go to recess. Come on, recess. Every kid loves recess. Would refuse, sit at his desk. And we would just rack our brains like, what is it? And then one day, we had done our mindfulness lessons in those classes, and another student was having a meltdown because it was something like the whole class got a reward. Somehow he missed it, and he was having
Hmm.
a hard time. And the other kid says to him, we need to go to Dr. J and do our breathing together. Well, the teacher brought both of them. And I look at the one kid, I'm like, do you want to do, it looks like we just need a minute to kind of get calm and in control of our body. It's a little tagline I like to use with them. I was like, do you want to do the bowl breath together or the finger breath? No, 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 no. Well, I had just recorded a video of me just doing both of those on YouTube. So I put my iPad in front of him and I was like, okay, well, then let's just watch this video. And all of a sudden, the other kid starts doing it as I'm saying, now put your hands together, take a deep breath, and then the kid that was crying, he starts doing it. And after this like 3.5 minute video, by the end, the kid's like laughing and talking, and then we were able to talk about what happened and how he got upset and maybe what we could try differently. Okay, then let's share this with the teacher. And and I actually then created a video for the YouTube channel saying, this was amazing. This kid was upset. He wouldn't listen to me live in person, but he would watch the video. Like, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
I'm like, there's something to this. So I've actually created my mindfulness lesson videos on my Educational Impact Academy website for parents or educators to purchase and use, because maybe if you don't think you have the knowledge and skills to do it with your child, you could watch it and use it with them to teach them.
Hmm.
Or a teacher who might be like, oh yeah, I love you, Karin, but one more thing, like please don't give me one more thing to try to teach and do. They could play it and actually have kids just on their own, or put it on a Schoology group where the kids, when they have a breakout session and they need to take their own little mental break, they can go in and watch one of the videos. So that's something that I'm actually turning around within my school this year to give them teachers access to it. Haven't done it yet. It's
Hmm.
a thought, an idea, and I need to act on it. You know how that goes
Hmm. Yeah.
sometimes. But that's what I'm thinking of next actually. So that was just incredibly powerful for me.
Yeah.
I just had a little girl yesterday, who was taking a math test, who's been remote for a year and might not have actually done a paper pencil test in a year
Oh yeah.
because
Oh
she
yeah.
struggled showing up a lot of
Yeah.
time. And the teacher was like, I can't get, like, she's shutting down. She won't work. She won't do. And I did my little problem solving process with her, and I got nowhere. But then as I'm sitting there, I see this tear coming to her eye. Like, God bless her. I don't know what was inside of her, but something wasn't, she wasn't able to just do what we wanted her to do. So then we gave her a choice and we went for a walk outside. We came back in. I said, "Do you want to try to finish the test with me and we'll talk later?" We finished the test. She went to lunch. Later, I went to see her. She had made me this little sign saying, "I loved being outside with you today." Like, you never know what it takes for these kids, you know? And I was like, so this is my thing. Like, I know, I heard you weren't doing your work earlier. What's up with that? Well, it was really hard for me.
Hmm.
Oh, and the teacher put you in the next door ladies class to see because she said you wanted to finish it there, but you didn't work there either. What was up with that? She had a lot of stuff on her desk and she's got too much colors in her room and her room's too small. So this process helps you get, now you might be like, well, that's the most cockamamie idea I ever heard of. But I actually literally take what they say at face value, as much as it's easy to say, well, they
Hmm.
didn't mean that. Well, that's not true. Well, she's being manipulative. I know, I've heard it. It's there. And I'm not trying to judge anybody for thinking that. But I love what Dr. Gold, a pediatrician on my podcast, helped me understand that behind every behavior, there's a story. And yes, it takes time. That's really hard to find in schools these days with teachers on their pacing guide and 20 plus kids.
Hmm.
But with this process and maybe a support of people in the building who know this process to help those kids, when I took that time with that girl yesterday, we found out what was the real issue and we weren't assuming we knew what it was. And
Hmm.
to me, that's powerful. And now it's empowering for those kids. And now when they see me, they know I treat them that way. And they're more apt to be open next time when they are
Yeah.
having a struggling or difficult moment.
Yeah. No, it's a really heartwarming story, Karen. And again, another example of where you've used innovation and you've used technology and you've used mindfulness techniques to to break through the problem. Um, and something we talked about, something I'm we'll close out on some technology pieces, but I downloaded the Calm app, the mindfulness app, and literally this week they unleashed or launched Calm Kids, right? And I was looking at it, and it's truly amazing. So we talk about mandating mindfulness in schools and how helpful it can be, but what's your thought on these apps that children or their parents can download? And I think one of the things is Thomas, you can do meditation with Thomas the Tank Engine.
Brilliant.
I might try that later on, a bit of Thomas the Tank Engine meditation. But what are your thoughts on those sort of digital innovations and how they can impact children?
So at first, initially, I would think like, no, it has to be in person. Like it has to be, something live. Like how's that going to really help? But actually, over the last year, I've seen my teachers use the Calm app in their classroom and talk about how much they love it. My one teacher, it helps her go to sleep at night. And then just watching this shift where the kid in person wasn't going to do the breathing activity with me, but he was going to watch me do it on the device. Like, so something's shifting where it's working for people. And maybe it's that thought that it might not be the best thing for you, but I've seen it work and be beneficial for some people.
Hmm.
And so I think that there is a whole world here to explore because my husband and I have been thinking like, how can we take what we do and almost create a digital game for kids to go into since that's the world they live in and tap into and do. I mean, how many parents are like, my kid's addicted to the computer games and I can't get them off it? Well, what if we created something that was positive and helping them, whether it was with character education, becoming a good citizen, mindfulness in a world that was digital with avatars? And I mean, that kind of is where all those kids are
Yeah.
and are living these days, as much as I don't want to admit that. And a lot of times I hear teachers still sharing from even a year ago, the kids are on the devices too much. They're on technology too much. It's not good. It's not healthy. So, as much as it's not healthy, it's not good, and we have to monitor it, somehow this is where a lot of us are living. to the point where I interviewed Brent Franson last weekend, who created an app most days where adults, as starting as young as 13 years old, can go in and pick one thing they want to do better at, whether it's sleep, exercise, whatever. And they check in, and it just is like, yes, I did it today, or no, I didn't. And there's nothing wrong with not doing it today, but most days is the whole key that we're going to eventually get there to. And it's that online social support group that people are realizing they can't live without. So I
Mhm.
think there's an opportunity to give them more of something healthy, um, where it's working for them. And I've even used them myself. So if it's working or it's something you want to explore, if it's helpful, I think that's what you have to gauge for yourself.
Yeah. No, but you know, you said something really interesting there. When we spoke with Tammy Irwin, who's the CEO of Verizon Business in the last season, she talked about you know, we looked at the educational use cases that Verizon are looking at, and this is going to be available soon, but you will be able to create that virtual playground. You'll be able to put the virtual reality headsets on, and you will be almost that in-person experience with the avatars, being able to go through all different aspects. So that is definitely on the horizon, Karen. That's something that we talk about and get excited about.
Mhm.
I think you need to we should talk offline. We should come up with a plan to build some virtual reality application with a headset that brings all those pieces together, because that's definitely in our future. I think
Yeah.
definitely.
And and even while you were just saying that, there's something about being a principal where, like, the kids just love you. Like, it's really sweet. It's so rewarding. I mean, I walk down the hallway and the kids are like, "Hi, Dr. J," like, what did I do or give them that I should get this much, like, attention from, right? But how creative if I could create a game that I'm simulating in the game as Dr. J, and, "Hey, kids, we're gonna do mindfulness, and let's sit down," and it was like a cartoon world where they would love, and because they know me, that draws them in more. Imagine if that got them connected to practicing mindfulness more often. I think you just said something that totally gave me an idea that I think is just the absolute most creative thing
And you
that
said
any
something
principal.
there. You said something there, and I see this with my children in their schooling here. They love their principal. They love their teachers. Yeah, you know, and again, when we look at you know, progression and the dichotomy of education for me in the 80s, you feared your headmaster. You feared
Yes.
him. You were scared. If he was coming down the corridor, you would get out of the way, and the last thing you would ever do is attempt to say hello. And I make fun of it now, but I do see this huge leap and I think you're a pioneer, Karen, in everything you do to create that environment to really help children, not just educate them, but like we said, these are different times for children these days. There's different stresses, there's different anxieties, and I think what you're doing is absolutely inspiring, innovative, and wonderful, Karen. So it's really, really great. Um, so I think we're almost coming towards the end of the session. So should we finish? Let's finish with like doing an affirmation to set us up for the
Okay.
week. If this is going to help, I want to give this a shot. Like I told you, I'm into my mindfulness now. I do a lot of meditation. So let's give this a shot. And if all our listeners want to participate, let's do this now.
Okay. So I found my favorite one that really launched me into this work from Louise, and I have to give credit to Louise Hay. So it's three small phrases, and we'll say the first one. I'll say the first one, and then we'll say it together, and we'll do that for all three. So the first one is, I am safe in the universe. So you can say that. I am
I am
safe
safe in the universe,
in the universe. And all life loves and support me.
and all
And
life
all life loves
loves
and
and
supports
supports me.
me. Life loves me.
Life loves me. Should we do that again? Do you say it once, or do you say it again?
Yeah, I'll say it once so you can repeat it.
Okay,
I
right.
am safe in the universe,
I am safe in the universe,
and all life loves and supports me.
and all life loves and supports me.
Life loves me.
Life loves me. Excellent. Great. Thank you. That's a first. That's a first for the great indoors, but I really enjoyed it. And I want to say thank you for joining. And um, if our listeners, I'm going to strongly recommend they visit your YouTube channel, your podcast, and your website, Karin. But where can they find them all? If you just want to make reference of that for our listeners.
So a good landing page is my website, www.educationalimpactacademy.com, or you can just search for me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Karin Jakubowski, and I'd love to connect with you. And if there's one thing that is a takeaway for you today, it's why I do what I do, and it's what gets me up every morning just to help one more child, one more parent, one more educator. And thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Karin. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm gonna stop recording, but stay right there while everything uploads.